The engine of the brand new luxury sedan purred like a contented predator. My son Leo polished the silver hood with a microfiber cloth, his smile glinting in the harsh afternoon sun. My daughter, Clara, was already in the passenger seat, filming a video for her social media, her voice a sickly sweet performance of fake humility. "Oh my God, you guys, we are so blessed," she cooed to her phone. They were parked in the driveway of my parents' house, the house I had poured my life savings into, the house that was supposed to be a memorial to them. The bright red "Sold" sign hammered into the front lawn was like a stake driven through my heart. I watched them from across the street, a ghost they couldn't see, the legal documents in my briefcase feeling heavier than a tombstone. They looked so proud, so utterly triumphant, having finally gotten what they wanted. They didn't know that the pitiful $80,000 they got for the house was nothing compared to the $2.5 million inheritance they had just forfeited by signing that sales contract. You might wonder how my own children could be so heartless, so monumentally greedy, as to sell their own grandparents' memorial home for a cheap thrill on 4 wheels. To understand why I didn't stop them, why I let them walk right into the trap I had set, you have to understand the 30 years I spent as their father, their provider, and their personal ATM. It all began not with hatred, but with a quiet, corrosive form of love, the kind that asks for everything and gives nothing back. It started with their mother, my late wife Evelyn, who taught them that my only purpose in life was to fund their dreams, no matter the cost to my own. This wasn't just revenge for a house, it was the final payment on a debt of pain that had been accruing for my entire adult life, and the interest was about to come due. For 30 years, I was a machine. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. every morning to work at the steel mill, a job that stole the feeling from my fingertips in the winter and left me perpetually dehydrated in the summer. When my shift ended, I didn't go home. I went to my second job, stocking shelves at a grocery store until midnight. I did this 6 days a week. On the 7th day, I fixed whatever was broken in our small rented house. My life was a loop of work, exhaustion, and brief dreamless sleep. I did it because Evelyn, my wife, believed our children deserved the best. To her, the best meant brand-name clothes I couldn't pronounce, school trips I couldn't afford, and a complete insulation from the reality of our finances. Leo and Clara never saw me leave in the dark or come home long after they were asleep. They only saw the fruits of my labor. Their mother was the sun they orbited. I was just the distant, uninteresting moon that controlled the tides of money. If they wanted something and I said no, I wasn't being responsible, I was being cruel. Evelyn would sigh and tell them, "Don't mind your father. He just doesn't understand." Then she would come to me in private and whisper, "Can't you just pick up one more shift, Arthur?" Look at their faces. So I did. I always did. The house for my parents was the one thing I ever did purely for myself. They had worked their fingers to the bone to give me a chance, and when their health started to fail, I couldn't bear the thought of them in a sterile nursing home. So I took on a third job on weekends, doing landscaping for cash. It took me 5 years, but I bought them a small, beautiful house with a garden, just 10 minutes from us. I promised my mother I would always keep it in the family, a place where our history would live. Evelyn called it Arthur's little project, a drain on resources we could be using for the kids. Leo and Clara complained about having to visit their grandparents there, calling it the dusty old museum. They never understood that every brick in that house was mortared with my sweat and my sacrifice. My mother passed away peacefully in the garden of that house. My father followed her 6 months later, lost without his compass. Their passing left a hole in my world, but my promise to them remained. The house became a sanctuary for me. I would go there on Sundays, mow the lawn my father had loved, and tend to the rose bushes my mother had planted. I'd sit on the porch and feel their presence, a quiet comfort in my lonely life. Then, 2 years later, Evelyn was diagnosed with an aggressive cancer. The last year of her life was a blur of hospital visits and medical bills that wiped out what little savings I had left. When she died, the sun the children orbited finally burned out. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that this shared grief would bring us closer. I was wrong. It only revealed the depths of their selfishness. They mourned their mother not for the woman she was, but for the lifestyle she had guaranteed them. My grief was a private, quiet thing. Theirs was loud and demanding. Just weeks after the funeral, Leo sat me down at the kitchen table. Clara stood behind him, arms crossed, a perfect portrait of solidarity. "Dad," Leo began, his tone dripping with a false sense of maturity he'd never earned. "We need to talk about the future, specifically Grandma and Grandpa's old house." I knew immediately where this was going. "It's just sitting there empty," he continued. "It's a dead asset. The property taxes alone are a drain. We've been thinking, if we sell it, we could really get a fresh start." Clara chimed in. "Leo has a great idea for a startup, and I want to put a down payment on a condo downtown. This is our chance, Dad. It's what Mom would have wanted, for us to be successful and happy." I looked at their eager, hungry faces, and I felt nothing but a cold, hollow ache. They hadn't mentioned my parents once. They hadn't acknowledged my promise. The house was just a pile of cash waiting for them. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The answer is no. I made a promise. That house is not for sale. Not now, not ever." Leo's face hardened. "Don't be so selfish, Dad," he scoffed. "They're gone. Holding on to an old empty house is pointless. It's time to think about the living." That was the moment I understood. To them, I wasn't really living either. I was just an obstacle. My refusal was met with a wall of icy silence. The small house we shared became a cold war theatre. Clara would sigh dramatically whenever I entered a room. Leo would take phone calls in the hallway, speaking loudly about his stalled business plans and the opportunities he was missing. They treated me like a warden, and themselves like prisoners, trapped by my sentimentality. They left notes on the counter for utility bills for the memorial house, circled in red ink, a passive-aggressive reminder of the financial burden I was imposing on them. They were trying to wear me down, to make my promise to my parents feel like a foolish, expensive indulgence. But I held firm. That house was the last piece of my soul that wasn't worn down by sacrifice, and I would not give it up. After a month of this failed siege, their tactics changed. It was Leo's idea, I'm sure. He always was the more cunning of the two. Suddenly, they were filled with concern for me. "Dad, you look so tired," Clara would say, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You've been through so much, we're worried about you." Leo started making me dinner, simple meals he'd learned from YouTube videos. "You need to rest, Dad," he'd insist. "Let us take care of things for a while." It was a masterful performance. After decades of being treated like a utility, their sudden warmth was disarming. A foolish, desperate part of me wanted to believe it was real. The moment they were waiting for came when I caught a severe flu. For 3 days, I was bedridden with a fever that left me weak and disoriented. On the 3rd day, Leo and Clara came into my room, their faces masks of loving concern. They brought a tray with tea and toast and a small stack of papers. "Dad, we don't want to bother you while you're sick, but a few bills are overdue," Leo said softly. "We've been thinking it would be so much easier if we could just help you manage your accounts until you're back on your feet. This is just a temporary power of attorney. It lets us pay your bills, handle the bank stuff, just so you can focus on getting better." He pointed to a line at the bottom of a page. "You just need to sign here." I was exhausted, my head was throbbing, and my heart ached with a desperate need to believe my children finally cared. I didn't read the fine print. I just took the pen and signed my name. It was the biggest mistake of my life. As soon as my fever broke and I was back on my feet, the warmth in our house vanished. The concerned children were replaced by the cold, distant strangers I knew. The dinners stopped, the gentle inquiries about my health ceased. They were busy, always rushing out the door, their phones buzzing with calls they would only take outside. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, that they were just giving me space. I wanted to believe the lie because the truth was too monstrous to consider. The truth arrived on a Tuesday morning, not from my children, but from a shaky voice on the phone. It was Mrs. Gable, the sweet elderly woman who had lived next door to my parents for 40 years. "Arthur, dear, I hope I'm not bothering you," she began, her voice thin with worry. "But I saw the strangest thing. There's a for sale sign on your parents' lawn. I thought perhaps it was a mistake." The world tilted on its axis. My hand trembled as I held the phone. "A mistake," I repeated numbly. "Yes, it must be." But I knew it wasn't. After I hung up, I drove to the house, a roaring in my ears that drowned out all thought, and there it was. A large, garish sign, pounded into the grass my father had so carefully tended. For sale. The words were a physical blow. I stumbled out of my car, my legs weak, and saw a smaller sign attached beneath it. Sale pending. They hadn't just listed it, they had already sold it. I stormed back home, the betrayal a white-hot fury in my chest. They were both in the living room, scrolling through their phones. "What have you done?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. They didn't even have the decency to look guilty. Leo looked up, his expression one of pure annoyance. "Oh, so you found out," he said, as if I'd discovered he'd eaten the last of the milk. "We were going to tell you." "You sold my parents' house," I stated, the words tasting like ash. "You sold our house," Clara corrected me, finally looking up from her screen. "We used the power of attorney you signed. It was all perfectly legal. We did what had to be done, Dad. You were being irrational." There was no remorse, no apology, only the cold, hard glint of victory in their eyes. In that moment, the man their mother had married, the father who had sacrificed everything, died, and someone else, someone much colder and much more patient, began to take his place. I didn't yell, I didn't scream or break things. I just looked at them, my two children, and I saw them for what they were, strangers who happened to share my blood. I nodded slowly, a deep and final understanding settling into my bones. "Okay," I said, and the single word was so devoid of emotion that it made Clara flinch. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving them to their victory. They probably thought I had been defeated, that I had accepted my new reality. They were wrong. I wasn't defeated. I was finally free. Free from the obligation to love them, free from the guilt their mother had weaponized against me, and free to protect the one thing I had left, my parents' memory. What my children never knew, what Evelyn never knew, was that the steel mill was only part of my story. In the few hours between my jobs, late at night when the house was quiet, I wasn't just resting, I was working on my own designs. I'm an engineer by training, though I never had the money for a fancy degree. I developed a new process for reinforcing high-tensile steel, a method that was cheaper and stronger than anything on the market. I patented it under a shell corporation. For the last 15 years, I have been the silent, sole owner of a company, Avance Engineering, that supplies specialized steel components to the aerospace and defense industries. I lived modestly because I despised the thought of my hard-earned money being squandered on designer handbags and fleeting social status. My wealth was my secret, a future I was building for a family I hoped would one day mature. I drove not to a bar or a friend's house, but to a sleek office building downtown. My lawyer, Mr. Chen, was not the kind of man who handled petty family disputes. He was a shark who swam in the deep waters of corporate law. I laid out the situation, my voice calm and steady. When I mentioned the power of attorney, he nodded grimly. But when I told him which house they had sold, his eyes lit up with a cold, professional fire. "Arthur," he said, pulling a thick file from his cabinet, "they've done it. They've actually triggered the legacy clause. Years ago, Mr. Chen had helped me place all my assets, including my company shares and the deed to my parents' house, into an irrevocable trust. The memorial house was designated a heritage asset. The trust explicitly stated that any beneficiary who prematurely forced the liquidation of a heritage asset for personal gain would forfeit their entire claim to the trust. Every last penny. The trap was there all along, I said. Let the sale close, I told Mr. Chen. I want them to have the money in their account. I want them to feel like they've won. The next few weeks were an exercise in patience. I packed a single suitcase, left my house key on the kitchen counter, and moved into a small furnished apartment downtown. I didn't leave a note. My silence was a vacuum, and I knew they would fill it with their own self-serving narratives. That I was sulking, that I was being dramatic, that I would eventually come crawling back when I got over it. They texted me once, a joint message from Leo's phone. The sale is closing on the 15th. The money will be in our accounts then. We'll transfer you some if you need it. The condescension was breathtaking. I deleted it without replying. While they waited for their payday, they lived lavishly off the deposit. Clara's social media became a sickening highlight reel of their premature victory. There were posts of expensive dinners with captions like, "Finally living the life we deserve," and shopping sprees for clothes that cost more than my weekly salary at the mill. They were broadcasting their betrayal to the world, creating an airtight public record of their greed. On the 15th of the month, the sale closed. A sum of $80,000, minus fees and taxes, was wired into Leo's bank account. The very next day, they bought the car. It was a silver sedan, a monument to their shallow desires, purchased with the blood, sweat, and memory of their grandparents. That afternoon, they drove it to the memorial house, now legally owned by another family. They parked it in the driveway, a final act of desecration. And that's when I returned, not to confront them, but to watch. I parked across the street just as I described and saw it all. Leo polishing the hood like a precious jewel. Clara narrating her false happiness to her phone. They were so absorbed in their performance of wealth, they didn't notice the black town car that pulled up silently behind their new prize. Mr. Chen stepped out. He was the picture of corporate authority in his sharp, dark suit. He held a thick leather briefcase. He didn't look angry or emotional. He looked like what he was, an executor. He walked calmly up the driveway, his expensive shoes clicking on the pavement. Leo finally looked up from polishing the car, a flicker of annoyance on his face at having his moment interrupted. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with the arrogance of the newly rich. Mr. Chen gave a thin, cold smile. "Yes," he said, his voice cutting through the air. "My name is David Chen. I am Arthur Vance's legal counsel. I'm here to serve you both with a notice of forfeiture and a summons for civil fraud." Leo laughed. It was a short, barking sound of disbelief. "Forfeiture? Fraud? Are you kidding me? We have a power of attorney. It's all legal. Now get off this property before I call the cops." Clara had stopped filming, her own smile frozen on her face. She looked from Mr. Chen to Leo, sensing that the script for their perfect day had suddenly changed. Mr. Chen didn't flinch. He opened his briefcase and took out a sheaf of documents. "The power of attorney you had your father sign is indeed a legal document," he said, his voice as crisp as a new banknote. "However, it gave you fiduciary duty over his assets. It did not give you ownership of them. The house and all of your father's significant assets were placed into the A. Vance Engineering Trust over a decade ago." "The what?" Clara whispered, the colour draining from her face. "A. Vance Engineering is your father's company," Mr. Chen continued, ignoring her. "It is currently valued at approximately $2.5 million. As beneficiaries of the trust, you are both set to inherit 50% of it upon his passing." He let the number hang in the air. Leo's jaw went slack. $2.5 million? He stammered. Mr. Chen nodded. That is correct. However, the trust contains a legacy clause. It designates certain properties as heritage assets. Your grandparents' home was the primary one. The clause is quite clear. Any beneficiary who facilitates the sale of a heritage asset for personal financial gain, as you have so publicly documented, he gestured vaguely toward Clara's phone, is immediately and irrevocably removed as a beneficiary. You forfeited your entire inheritance the moment you signed the sale contract. He wasn't finished. As for the fraud, he said, his eyes landing on the gleaming silver car, you obtained the power of attorney under the false pretense of managing your father's bills while he was incapacitated. This constitutes civil fraud. The trust will be suing you both for damages and for the full return of the $80,000, which was an asset of the trust that you illegally converted. That car, he said, his voice dropping, is evidence, and it will be seized. It was then that they both turned and looked across the street. They saw me standing there, my arms folded, watching. The triumphant heirs were gone. In their place stood two terrified, cornered children who were only just beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had just lost. The illusion shattered. Clara let out a strangled sob, her phone clattering to the pavement. Leo, the self-proclaimed business genius, just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Then, as if controlled by the same string, they ran. They scrambled across the street toward me, their faces twisted in masks of pure panic. "Dad!" Leo cried out, his voice cracking. "Dad, please, we didn't understand. We didn't know about any company. We're sorry." Clara grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my sleeve. "So sorry, Daddy. We made a mistake. Just tell him to stop. You can't do this to us. We're your children." Their tears were real, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of greed, shed for the millions of dollars that had just vanished before their eyes. I looked at them, at their desperate, pleading faces, and I felt absolutely nothing. The part of me that could have felt pity had been burned away. "Sorry?" I asked, my voice level and cold. "Were you sorry when you watched me work 3 jobs to keep you in designer clothes? Were you sorry when you complained about visiting the grandparents who adored you? Were you sorry when you manipulated me on my sickbed, tricking me into signing away my life's work?" I pulled my arm from Clara's grasp. "You're not sorry you betrayed me. You're sorry you got caught. You're not sorry you sold my parents' memory. You're sorry you sold it too cheap." Behind them, Mr. Chen was speaking calmly to the new homeowners, who had just pulled up, confused by the scene. I could hear fragments of the conversation. "Fraudulent sale, title is void, full refund will be processed." I looked back at Leo and Clara. "That $80,000, you owe it back to the trust. Since you've already spent a good portion of it," I glanced at the silver sedan, "you are now in debt, you have lost your inheritance, you will soon lose that car, and you are facing a lawsuit. This is the life you chose." Leo sank to his knees on the pavement. "What are we supposed to do?" he whimpered. I looked at him, then at his sister for the last time. "You are adults," I said. "You'll figure it out." I turned my back on them and walked away, the sound of their wailing fading behind me until it was nothing more than a distant, meaningless noise.